Welcome everyone, and fantastic to see such a good turnout. A lot of energy nerds in Perth, obviously. I'm Fraser Maywood. I'm the chair at Sustainable Energy Now. We're a non-aligned clean energy advocate. I'll be your MC and moderator for this evening. Thanks to our organising committee, our co-host, the Smart Energy Council, and they're the renewable peak energy body. And thank you to all our speakers for coming tonight, and the audience both here and online for turning up, and also for your continuing support of our community education program. So we've got a full agenda for tonight with opportunities for audience questions using your smartphone and the Slido app. So just a quick one on emergency response. In the unlikely event of emergency, we'll have the normal continuous beep, beep, beep. Please remain calm and move to the nearest fire exit. So there's two down here and there's one at the top. And you may be directed by the fire warden, and the exit to the building is to the left out here. And that's where the assembly area is. So acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on, the Whadjuk people. We acknowledge then respect their continuing culture and contribution they make to the life of Perth and regional and Western Australia. We recognise elders past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So tonight's theme is an opportunity to hear the climate and energy policies from the three major political parties and a community independent representative. I should say that this is not all your choices of political parties. I've been lobbied last couple of days for more people to come here. So when you do cast your vote, there's actually more than these people here. So each speaker is given 5 minutes to present their policy from the lectern, and it's a focus on what they plan to do, not on past achievements. Okay, so we kind of recognize there's been a lot done, but there's a lot to do. So that's what we're going to focus on. So Aria is our timekeeper here. She'll give you some warnings at 2 minutes and 1 minute, and then time. And we'll also be restricting responses to questions to less than 2 minutes to ensure we get through as many questions as possible, whilst giving the speakers an opportunity to explain their policy response succinctly. So after each speaker have presented their climate and energy policies, they will assemble on stage here as a panel and responds to questions from me, the moderator. So I'll be posing one question to each speaker, and then we'll be tabling questions through Slido. So you notice on Slido, well, that's the meeting number there. If you've got Slido up, it's got an upvoting and downvoting feature. So we'll be selecting the most popular questions. So probably best to look at what's there already and upvote and downvote it, or you can type your own question as you like. And that applies to on people who are online as well, so they can also see that. So it's not a debate, and the speakers will not be challenging each other on their policies. The questions will come from the moderator or the audience. And towards the end of the evening, we'll be opening the mic up to those who are able to ask direct questions, which is generally the journalists in the audience. So it's an information session, which hopefully people will gain some insight as to the party or candidates' climate and policies in the run-up to the state election on Saturday, 8th of March. So a few words from me to frame the climate and energy challenge facing us. We are already experiencing climate change with extreme weather, marine heat waves, and more severe frequent bushfires. And the need to transition quickly to clean energy sources is urgent. The science tells us that burning fossil fuels is the primary contributing factor to climate change, and whilst gas produces less greenhouse gas emissions at the point of combustion than coal, a recent peer-reviewed study by Robert Howarth of Cornell University confirmed what many in the industry already knew, that the supply chain emissions from LNG are higher than coal. So no economy here or overseas can be decarbonised by burning gas. Thank you. No claps from the front here yet, but anyway. The CSIRO highlighted in 2019 study, industry-sponsored study, that continued investment in gas infrastructure displaces and delays investment in clean energy, both here and overseas. WA is doing the hard work to get our coal out of our energy system, and we are partway through the transition, which by its nature is a messy, long, and susceptible to disruption. And we acknowledge the work the government and government agencies have done thus far. There is still much to be done, and quickly, including transitioning off gas. So this is the challenge for politicians, elected by the people as our leaders, to solve our big problems and to create a viable environment for us and for future generations by the development and implementation of good policies. So energy policy needs to address a number of items, including security of supply, energy costs for consumers, especially those facing cost of living pressures, climate change, and the wider environmental impacts. And governments are elected and need to stay in power to enact good policies. And that requires managing oppositions to their policy agenda. And here in WA, our energy policy is heavily influenced by the politics of power from vested incumbent interests, and the opposition to a timely transition is significant. And just to clarify, that opposition are not the ones elected by the community to determine the future of our state. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce the candidates here tonight. And we've got 4 speakers here tonight. And our first speaker is the Honourable Reece Whitby, MLA, and he's the Energy Minister. So Reece has been the member for Baldivis since 11th of March 2017, and Reece was re-elected in 2021 and appointed Minister. And the Minister holds the portfolios of energy, environment, climate change in the Cook Labor government. Please welcome Reece to the stage.
Thanks very much, Fraser, and it's a joy to be here tonight with so many people interested in this very challenging area of public policy, but also it's a time that is critical in the transition. I've got a speech here, and I've taken your advice, Fraser, in terms of not building up on what we've done, so I'm going to do some edits on the run because, you know, politicians like to talk about what they've done. Can I acknowledge my colleagues here, Brad Pettitt and the Honourable Steve Thomas, and of course a budding hopeful member of the Legislative Assembly down in Cottesloe, Dr. Rachel Horncastle. So good to see you as well, and good luck in your campaign. Look, I will mention where we're at, and the fact is that as Energy Minister, I'm also Minister for Climate Action and Environment. And a lot of people have an issue with that and say, you know, how can you be a Minister of both areas? I think they are not mutually exclusive, that they are very complementary. So many of the solutions to climate action, to reducing our emissions, can be found in the energy sector by reducing emissions and decarbonising our economy. So that's why I'm excited about the opportunities. You know, we right now, as Perth has had a pretty ordinary afternoon in terms of solar, we know that wind is out there providing, I think, 20% of our energy needs was the information this afternoon in terms of our energy mix. And of course, batteries are about to kick in. Grid-scale batteries. Now, we've built 300 megawatts worth down at Kwinana. There's another big battery going on in Collie. There's a private big battery. We are changing the way the energy system works fundamentally in Western Australia. This was not the case a few short years ago. So again, my view is that these are enormously challenging times, but also times brimming with opportunity and excitement, because the other side of the transition offers so many opportunities for new industries, new opportunities for West Australian workers, new opportunities for the environment as well. We are committed as a government to achieving net zero emissions by 2050, as well as lowering, and this is important, our own state government emissions, not our economy-wide emissions in Western Australia, but our state government emissions by 80% by 2030. That's a big number. A lot of that is about transitioning out of coal down in Collie. We are a state which has a very different emissions profile from other states, and I'll be very frank about that. We are a powerhouse of the nation. The things we do here, the things we mine, process and export means we create a lot of emissions. We're not Tasmania, so we've got a tougher, more specific role ahead of us, but this is where the opportunities are. Central to our commitment is, as I said, getting out of coal and replacing it with a mix of onshore wind farms and big batteries. Now, you need to do this properly. You can't rip the plug out of Collie right now, which was, sorry to say, Steve, that was your party's commitment at the last election, and one which was actually criticised within the Liberal Party itself. It needs to be sensible. It needs to have a structured plan for transition, but it does need to happen. And I can talk about Synergy's big battery in Collie, 500 megawatts, 2,000 megawatts hours being built, very close by Neoen, an international company, doing a very similar size batteries. These are internationally significant grid-scale batteries. You have to go to California, I think, at the moment to find a bigger one. Certainly the biggest in Australia when they're completed. Fundamentally changing the way our energy system operates in the Swiss. We are committed to the development of wind farms in the wheat belt and Midwest, and we're creating, I think, many new jobs and opportunities from the development of this new renewable energy. Ari, you'll have to keep an eye on me because I haven't timed this speech, but I'll speed up as we go. Important and critical to this is transmission. To have transmission, you need, to have emission reductions, you need the transmission. And this is something we're working on and have been doing for some time. Specifically, the clean energy link north of Perth, so connecting the Swiss grid with greater voltage capacity into the Midwest. We have some of the world's best wind on the planet. I mean, it's about consistency and how much energy you can generate from a turbine. The consistency, I think, is I think it's about 60% in some cases on average. It is world leading, so we need to take advantage of that. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for Western Australia to become a green energy superpower. Time's up already, my gosh. I've only just got started. Look, I do have a speech which had lots of other things to say, and I'm sorry I didn't get there, but we've got Q&A opportunities after this. So, I'm sure I'll be able to elaborate more. But look, thank you for the opportunity. It's always good to speak about these things. 5 minutes seems incredibly short, but I'm sure you'll have lots of questions to ask me a bit later on. So thank you very much, Tal.
Many thanks for that, Reece. Much appreciated. So keep the questions coming through Slido. Our second speaker is the Honourable Dr. Steve Thomas. He's the MLE Shadow Minister for the Energy for the Coalition. Steve has been a Liberal member of the Legislative Council representing the South West since 2017. Steve served in the Legislative Assembly from 2005 to 2008, representing the electorate of Capel, and is now the Shadow Minister for Energy. Steve is also a practicing veterinary surgeon, so please welcome Steve to the microphone.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. It's fantastic to be here. Oftentimes, when you're a Conservative, some of these forums can be a bit interesting. But I'm very much looking forward to some tough questions. I like a tough question. If you find I'm a bit combative, that's probably pretty normal. Now, I want you to have a look at the slide above us here. And I apologise that it's a bit small if you're close up. But what I want you to see is the two peaks last year and this year of energy in the Southwest Interconnected System. That's a system that covers Perth down to Albany and over to Kalgoorlie. And if you look at the 18th of February 2024, which was last year's peak, a total of 4,233 megawatts, 92% of it coming from both a combination of coal and gas. 92%. Now, that occurred when you also had some closing down of industries, which is what the government does. When there's not enough energy in the system, it sheds demand. So it goes to some major companies, including its own water corporation, and says, can you shut down, please? So the peak is actually probably somewhere between 400 and 500 megawatts higher than that. In this year, we hit a new peak. So on the 20th of January, a month or so ago, we had a new peak, 4,486 megawatts. 87% of that coming from coal and gas. Now, wind was slightly higher this year than it was last year, but all these other things came in at a fairly small proportion. I want to say to you that the first and most important job in government is to keep the lights on. That is the first role of government in relation to the energy portfolio. And what's going to happen in the next few years is the lights will not stay on under the current government's plan for transition. You cannot replace that level of coal and gas in particular in the period of time the government is talking about. Nobody in Collie believes that the government is going to get out of coal by 2029, the end of 2029. No one expects that, because there's not enough alternative. It takes, on average, somewhere between 33 and 55 months to get an alternative energy system approved and built. It's going to take a long period of time, 55 months. It's nearly 5 years. So if you're going to start building the alternative generation, you needed to start last year or the year before to actually deliver the outcomes. And you need to deliver far more than the government's currently proposing. So what is the government talking about? This is the government plan. It's going to close 1,300 or 1,360 megawatts of coal over the next 5 years up until the end of 2029. It is going to invest, and it was originally $3 billion, it was $2.8 billion, it was $3.8 billion. Nobody's entirely sure what the government is going to invest in it, but it is going to add some renewable regeneration, that is 810 megawatts, half of it going to the Water Corporation. And the reason they're doing that is that the Water Corporation governments previously always said that the desalination plants would run on renewable energy, and they never have, so there's a bit of catch up. And another 400 odd megawatts going to Synergy. 400 megawatts, as I'm sure my good friend and colleague, the Honourable Dr. Brad Pettitt will tell you, is nowhere near enough to transition. It doesn't work. Yes, there's some batteries in the system, but there's nowhere near enough. It's not going to work. A massive investment would be required to deliver the sort of outcome that is to be delivered. So, what is the Liberal Party policy? And this is public policy. It was released in May last year. We will extend the lifespan of the coal generators where it is necessary and where it's possible until renewable generation supported by gas generation, backup and storage can meet the needs of the state. We have committed to an additional 300 megawatts of gas generation, not base load, but as a peaking load to deliver the amount of energy that is required. Now, some of you will probably ask me questions around nuclear in a bit. We are not afraid of any technology. We are looking towards the most cost-efficient delivery of energy in a secure manner. Now, in this particular point in time, that doesn't look like it's nuclear, but we're not opposed to looking at it, talking about it, and researching it so that sometime in the future it might arrive. We're also looking at a 5-year royalties exemption on vanadium so that we can actually increase the vanadium production in Western Australia. There's some interesting things happening in vanadium. There's some interesting things happening in alternative battery production. And a couple of things I want to say. First off is we would open Western Australia to the mining and export of uranium immediately to meet the world's demand for the zero emissions nuclear technology. And I want to give this commitment in relation to offshore wind farms. Now, I know the government's not overly fond of them either, but I would not be looking at giving offtake agreements to offshore wind farms until all other forms of energy that are required have been looked at, examined and determined to see whether they can provide that instead. I think there are some significant issues with that. That's the plan of the Liberal Party. I'm happy to give you far more detail. You might find that we get bogged down in highly technical debate because I love it. I'm an energy nerd. But that's where we want to go.
Thanks very much, Steve. Keep the questions coming. A third speaker is the Honourable Dr. Brad Pettitt, WA Greens. Brad was elected to the Legislative Council of the WA Parliament in 2021. And prior to entering Parliament, Brad was the Mayor of Fremantle, first elected in 2009 and re-elected in 2013 and 2017. So you must have been doing something right.
Got lucky.
Prior to this, Brad was the Dean of School of Sustainability at Murdoch University. Please welcome Brad.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I start by saying something that Reece and I absolutely agree on? And this is a quote from you, Reece. Hope you don't mind me quoting you, because I think this is about climate and energy, and this is quite important because I guess I do fundamentally agree with this, that climate change is the greatest challenge of our lifetime and we need to take decisive action this decade. The point that I want to make today is, are we doing that? And that's the question I'll ask. And I guess what I want to show you is I don't think we are, but I think we can. The reason I don't think we are, I think it just plays out in the numbers. Our emissions are the only state with rising emissions. The rest of the country's emissions are going down. And there's no serious plan to get our emissions down this decade. The Climate Council did quite a good report in terms of a scorecard, and you could see there are good reasons why our emissions aren't going down. We don't have a 2030 renewable energy target. We don't have a 2030 emissions target like every other state. And our overall state share of renewable energy is actually much lower than our counterparts, although I'd say the Swiss is comparable to the East Coast. But we've got a long way to go and a huge opportunity. Sorry, double microphones. Oh, that's better. Okay, so now there's a key part of this is that our renewable energy rollout is stalling. We can see the green one's great. That's rooftop solar. That's you, all of you out there doing good things in rooftop solar space. But in terms of wind and large-scale wind and large-scale solar, it's been slow going. In fact, not much progress at all. And my real fear is that we will continue. I think WA, frankly, and the government's been putting their foot on the hose. And this is in danger of getting worse. There were some reports by ABC recently about a proposed $100 per megawatt charge to connect to the grid. So average size project, 100 megawatt project, it's a $10 million upfront charge. We'll just see further investment go east or overseas, where we need our grid to go through a rapid transition that actually takes out, again, I agree with the Minister, let's take out coal by 2030, but we can't also agree with the opposition is we're not going to do that at the current rate unless we start to do something fundamentally differently. The good news is, and I want to thank the people of SEN who did some modelling for a project called Climate Positive Perth, which actually showed that the cheapest form of energy for WA is 87% renewable, but that requires a huge amount of extra wind, 4,800 megawatts, far in excess of the 810 that the government has proposed, and large-scale PV as well. This is a major investment and a major transition, but ultimately one that delivers cheaper energy and cleaner energy for our state. So that's at the large scale. Then just zooming down to our households, which again could and should be part of the solution with heat pumps and batteries and solar and energy efficiency and electric vehicles. Our houses can go from being part of the climate and energy problem to being part of the solution. But at the moment, they're not. And there's good reasons for that, because we've incentivised household solar, but we haven't done batteries. I'm showing off right now because I just got this in a couple of days ago. My household battery at my house, and I've been just noticing, even though it was a bad Sunday today, my battery's still at 100% right now because it's so effective, and I actually have been switched off grid for the last 4 or 5 days, just out of fun. But I will turn it back on again because we can. Now, I say that I'm in a fortunate position where I get to buy a battery because I earn enough money to do that. Most people can't, and there is a really important role for government in actually incentivising home batteries, heat pumps, all of these things for people on lower incomes, especially. WA, as you can see, the only state. I don't know why. This is a great mystery to me. Why are we the only state without a single tick? It's outrageous, and we should, and this is one of the key policies that we're proposing going forward. Final point I want to make is about export. Look, I appreciate a lot of our emissions do come from export both industries, but I really want to reinforce what Fraser said at the start. There is no evidence, and I'm happy for someone to get up and show me the document, but where is the evidence that our growing gas exports to Asia are reducing emissions? This document, Woodside commissioned. CSIRO did it. And what it shows is actually that our gas is delaying the adoption of renewable energy, of low emissions technology, and is pushing up their emissions in the region. Again, another report looking on further sources that came out just a week ago, reinforcing this. Woodside's claim that displaces coal, not gas, is not point of evidence. It's displacing renewables. We need to stop this gaslighting of everybody and accept that actually we need to be helping Asia get onto renewables, not more gas. Thank you.
Many thanks, Brad. Keep the questions coming through Slido. Fourth speaker, final speaker, last but not least, is Dr. Rachel Horncastle, who is Cottesloe Community Independent candidate. Rachel has been a medical doctor for over 30 years, with 25 years as a GP, subspecialising in mental health and skin cancer. So Rachel has recently been asked to stand as the independent candidate for Cottesloe. Please welcome Rachel to the lectern.
Thank you, Fraser. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk about climate and energy with you all tonight. Thanks also to my fellow forum speakers for their illuminating presentations, and particularly to Brad for his very clear messaging around all of this. So, what can an independent bring? I am asked this regularly these days. There are many things. I'll tell you about just 3 of them. Let's start with transparency. And I think this is particularly relevant to the energy sector in Western Australia. I personally disclose every donation that is made to my campaign in real time on my website. It is shameful that this is not the same for all politicians, candidates, and political parties. We should know who the vested interests are that are shaping legislation that affects all of us. Another point of difference is our community engagement. Myself and my team, over the last 2 or 3 months, we have door-knocked over 4,500 doors. So I can truly say that I know the issues the community is concerned about and the changes that they would like to see. We are hearing a lot about the rise in household bills and concern about environment and climate change. Something else that an independent can offer is collaboration. After I'm elected, I will be happy to work with any side of government and will support legislation based on merit to bring about the best outcome for my community. This is a photo of me with Professor Fiona Stanley. I think all of you know who this wonderful lady is. Why do I have this here? Because we have to factor in the health impacts of any energy system. And Fiona's life's work has been dedicated to environmental impacts on children's health, development, and growth. She is also committed to science and data-based decision-making. As a medical doctor, I will bring a scientific, expert evidence and health-based lens to policy making. So, rapid reduction of emissions, transition to clean energy domestically and at an industry level, as well as energy efficiency, are all science-backed essential components of climate action. To reduce emissions, we need to resuscitate the West Australian Climate Action Bill. It is dying somewhere on a shelf. We need interim emissions targets. We're the only state in Australia without them. And we need renewable energy targets. Without these, we cannot provide the sustainable energy industry with the certainty that they need for their investors. What this slide represents, and I have to thank Saul Griffiths for it. If any of you don't know who he is, talk to me afterwards, he's awesome. So this is the democratization of energy. Families can take control of their energy use and slash their bills. Just this morning, I was out on the hustings and talking to Philippa. She told me about her daughter in Melbourne who has recently electrified her home. Her energy bills have been slashed. They were $600 every quarter. They're now only $60 a quarter. Governments can and should legislate to make this more accessible for all of our communities. I will also be supporting legislation for new builds to adopt the National Energy Efficiency Standards. This will ensure more comfortable homes as well as cutting the cost of electricity. Retrofitting of old buildings should be rolled out also, and mandatory disclosure of a building's energy efficiency at sale or lease should prompt over time increased energy efficient homes for all. We need to be looking at reducing our energy use. And a just transition. We need to ensure no one is left behind. Sitting on cross-party committees as an independent, I can offer a more nuanced approach. One size fits all is not always what we want or need. We need to consider those renting, those in apartment buildings, those with low incomes and living in social housing. And of course, I'll be advocating for policies to support a highly skilled workforce to enable the transition. In summation, once elected, I'll be fighting for climate and energy policies that are science-based, data-driven, and consider the impacts on the environment and the health of our community. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rachel. Well done. I know Rachel wasn't looking forward to public speaking, but I think she did an excellent job, so well done. So what I'd like to do is for the speakers now to join on a panel. There's enough seats for everyone, so no need to fight.
Okay, I think I left my pen up.
Okay. So I've got some questions to pose to the speakers, and once I and then I'll be taking questions from Slido once I work out how to use it. Okay. The first question is to Brad. Brad, I wonder if you could clarify. You said 87% renewables, and obviously the remaining 30% is coming from somewhere, presumably gas or coal. So I wonder if you could clarify the role of gas in the Greens energy policy.
So,
Are we on? No, we're not.
there we are. Okay.
So
the role of gas, put simply, is a diminishing role, and one. I mean, often I think the cheap shot is taken that the Greens want to turn gas off overnight. No one's saying that. What we're saying is that the more wind, solar and battery storage you have, the less gas you're going to need. As I said, there's a sweet spot right now on the back of SEN's modelling. It says 87% is the cheapest, but the modelling actually went all the way out to the high 90s. It just gets more expensive because you need a lot more storage for those very rare days where you have no wind and cloud. So there is a sweet spot, but certainly I think over time we will see gas will play a role, but it will just be for peaking on those rare days where you have multiple days where there's no wind and cloud. But we can predominantly run off renewables, and I get nervous when I see because my nervousness is around certainly Honourable Steve Thomas up front. We're going to build new gas that will stay in the system for a long time. And my real fear is the more we do that, it will actually displace renewables, which are more expensive, and that's where I don't want to see us go.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Rachel, put you on the spot. Your website's supporter wall is very transparent in the source of campaign funding, and I applaud you for that. And it recognises Campaign 200 as a major donor. So what influence does Climate 200 have on your climate and energy policy? Is your...
Can you hear me? Thank you. Turning it on always helps. Yeah, Climate 200 have given me a donation, and everyone can see that. You can see exactly who's donated. My son has given me $80. And genuinely, there is no influence from that money. There has been no contract signed. I've never spoken to Simon Holmes à Court, for example. But it is a real honour to receive that money, because Climate 200, you may know, but if you don't, it is purely a crowdfunding platform. And there are over 35,000 donors. And interestingly, that number shot up after Trump got in. And they will only donate to candidates and politicians who adhere to three principles. And they are political integrity, science-based climate action, and promoting the respect and safety of women. So it was, as I say, an honour to receive the money, but there are no caveats with it, and my policies are based on what my community needs and what they have told me they want.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for clarification. Steve, your question.
Right.
Will the Coalition support the WA Climate Change Bill and related legislation if and when the bill is reintroduced into State Parliament? And will it support the inclusion of interim emissions targets?
In the first instance, let's see what the bill says, Fraser, rather than jumping in saying we're going to support some bill in the future that could say anything. So as with all legislation, you look at it when it arrives, you find the good bits, the bad bits, you might support some bits and oppose other bits, and then how the debate goes determines your ultimate support. In relation to targets, my energy policy is committed the State Liberal Party to the 2050 net carbon neutral, so the 2050 target. In relation to interim targets, I know people want to use interim targets as a lever to pressure change, but the reality is that if your focus is in the first instance to keep the lights on, those interim targets are probably unachievable. So when people start to talk about, and it's possible the government might get to 80% reduction in their renewal and their emissions by 2030, but not by keeping the lights on or the air conditioners running, and that's going to be the problem. So what we've said is we remain committed to the 2050 target. The interim targets are actually, in my view, something of a distraction. I know they're a great leverage point for advocates in particular and action groups, but the reality is that they actually get in the way of having a long-term plan, and that's what the state needs. The state needs a transition plan that will work. I mean, whether ultimately it's Reece as the energy minister or Steve as the energy minister, the state will get out of coal. We're only arguing the time frame and the way that we do it. Ultimately, there will be, whether Reece is the minister or Steve is the minister, there will be a significant amount more renewable energy production. We're arguing the time frames and how we actually do that. There might be some greater variations as we get down the track. I mean, the reason we'll get out of coal is very much about the economies and economics of coal,
Right.
as much as anything else.
Just stop you there, Steve.
Yep.
I think you've answered the question, so I appreciate that. A final question from me, Reece. So the WA domestic gas supply and demand, as we all know, is quite finely balanced. And we hear a lot about government support for increasing supply via large-scale gas development. So if elected, what will be State Labor's policy for reducing gas demand by helping big industrial users of domestic gas decarbonise through electrification? So we're talking the likes of Yarra Fertiliser, Alcoa, South 32, CSBP, Coburn Cement, etc. So those are the big gas users, and if they were to decarbonise, and that's another way of managing that gas supply balance.
So, thank you, Fraser. So one of the, obviously you have the use of gas in producing electricity, and I agree with Brad. I think gas has a use-by date. I think sorry, testing 1, 2, 3. I'll get closer. So I said what I just said was that I agree with Brad that gas should and does have a use-by date. It will be around for a long time, and I think eventually be a bespoke source for some sort of industry practices and processes. But we're committed to a renewable future. Now, in terms of the industrial demand on the system, in terms of the gas that they require for their energy processes at the moment, the best thing we can do is what we're already doing in terms of investing and being an instigator of new transmission, new infrastructure. And we talked about, whether it's a 300 megawatt gas turbine that Steve's talked about, or, whether there are not enough wind farms in the system. There's a focus on what the government is committed to delivering. But I think what we're forgetting about is there's a whole energy market out there, a regulated market that looks for opportunities for demand to be filled. And that happens all the time. It's a regular part of the Australian energy market operator who looks about the oncoming demand and then sets market signals to get that new infrastructure online. There's a lot happening right across Western Australia outside of Synergy, outside of Western Power, in terms of investment in and Horizon in investment in new renewable energy. And we need to be a government that's investing in our own, but also making sure that we can provide the infrastructure, the transmission that is important. Now, comment earlier that the criticism about the $100,000 a megawatt. Well, these are big companies. They have billions of dollars to invest. The alternative is that at the moment, there's no support. They have to provide all of that cost up front. So we've had careful discussions with industry. We've looked at what is a reasonable figure to support their business case and their business plan to provide this new infrastructure. They are quite happy to provide an amount of commitment of funding. And they've talked about, no, seriously, I'm not talking about mums and dads here. I'm talking about big corporate energy companies. And they've talked about the $100,000 mark being a reasonable amount of money. If you're going to invest billions of dollars, you want the infrastructure to get your electrons to market. A lot of the best wind resources and solar resources in this state aren't in the Kwinana Strip. They're in the Wheat Belt or in the Midwest or up in the Pilbara. How do you get those electrons where they're being produced efficiently, where the changes are great for them to be produced? How do you get them to the market, to the users? So this is where our government's playing a key role in planning it, mapping out that infrastructure, doing the groundwork on the ground with farmers and other communities or Aboriginal body corporates in the case of the Pilbara and the Kimberley. And there are wonderful opportunities, but this is what we need to do. Get the transmission, create a market and an opportunity for investment, and the electrons will come.
Okay, so we're talking about electrons there, but the question really was about how you're going to help Alcoa decarbonise through electrification, because that's another issue. So the assumption is that the power will be available. The question,
there is an international effort on companies that are providing markets to the goods to market or commodities to market to reduce their emissions.
Yes.
Okay, if I want to sell my iron ore or my product overseas, I have a benefit if I can say it's produced with green electrons. At the moment, they don't have access to that. How do they get out of gas? They have green electrons being available. So if we provide that transmission and the impetus for that market to be created, then they can get out of gas.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Reece. Thanks for that clarification. Much appreciated. So we're now switching to audience questions, and unlike the Nuclear for Australia, all audience questions will appear here. We haven't got someone secret in the back screening questions out, so they will all be here. And the first question is, will the Labor Party commit to a state emissions target for 2030? I guess that's for you, Reece, is it?
Yeah. Look, we have committed. We've said 2050 net zero. We've said an interim target by 2035 on the back of the federal government determining its target for 2035. 2030 is less than 5 years away. In Victoria and other states of Australia where they have a 2030 target, they've given at least up to 12 years in Victoria's case of timing for the economy to respond. We don't believe there's a lot to be gained in a very short time frame to hit 2030. So and I've said before that we have a very different emissions profile. We have a huge challenge in this state, but we are committed to net zero by 2050. We believe that we will look at what the federal government was deciding for the nation in 2035. They have their 2030 target of 43% at the moment. And what the federal government has indicated already is that even with Western Australia's contribution as it currently stands to emission reduction, and you've pointed out that there's demand on increase at the moment because of what we do for the economy and for the international economy, even with that, they are on target to achieving 43%. So, it's not every state has to meet that individual target. It's an aggregated amount. We have a huge challenge here. But I believe it is possible, and if 2035, with the federal government setting its 2035 target, we can look at using their modelling and their information and sharing information, we can come up with a practical, deliverable target for 2035.
Okay, thank you, Reece. Unfortunately, a lot of these questions are going to be directed at you in the hot seat, but Brad, do you want to add something to that, Brad?
I mean, I just want to make the case for a 2030 target and this is not me saying this is industry wanting certainty. I mean, every other area we give industry certainty about what they could do. And by not having a 2030 target, we actually make it harder. And I just have to also push back on the idea that industry was somehow supportive of the 100,000. I honestly think just like Look, because the only industry who supported that are the really big companies, and that's and you actually almost admitted that. Yeah, the big ones don't mind because you know what? They can wear it. It's the small and medium-sized renewable energy companies, the ones we want in this state, which you're going to push offshore and interstate. In fact, the Smart Energy Council have said that. And there is a real danger here that this is a time when we need to be ramping it up, and it's actually going to frankly, put a foot on the hose. And I would say right now, and I'm happy to, what large-scale renewable energy generation is under construction on our Swiss right now?
Oh, hang on, Brad.
I mean, because it's a reasonable, but okay, I'll put it as a question to everybody, because, I mean, there's not much.
Yep.
And this is the point I'm making. If it's coming so quickly, as the Minister says, why is there nothing under construction? Because we've got our foot on the hose.
Right. Hang on, Brad. What we don't want to do is to turn it into a debate. And I know it's very difficult because you're all very passionate, you've all got your policies and you can all respond to each and every question. So what I'd like to do is really sort of see if we can get through the audience questions and have responses, different responses from other participants, other speakers. This is a question from George Crisp. Is George in the audience, I think, or is he online? Yeah, he's online, is he? Okay. So George is asking something that was highlighted before, and are Woodside and WA Labor telling us that gas will reduce greenhouse emissions and aid the transition to renewables when both of these claims are false? So who's best to respond to that? Reece, do you?
Looking at me, Fraser. I'm not going to respond on behalf of Woodside. They can tell their own story, but I do know there is a role for gas right now. I look forward to the day, Brad and Steve and Rachel, where we can step away completely. I think technology will get there, and I'm an optimist. We can have renewable generation and battery storage and other forms of green energy, whether it's hydrogen or some sort of pumped hydro, which is difficult in Western Australia. But we're not there now. And what we don't want to do is to say we don't need the gas, and because we do rely on its firming. We need renewable generation first and foremost. It's the cheapest form of energy. We're backed by grid-scale battery, and we are leading the nation in regards to big-scale batteries. But it has to be firmed by gas. Nuclear is something I don't support at all, and it's not for ideology. It is for purely practical, economic and practical reasons. Because gas has an advantage, you can dial it up and down. So when it's needed, you can whack it on, and when the sun's shining, and we got to, I think, well over 80%, was it 80% plus 84% on November 17 of renewable energy in this state, and we can dial gas right down. So there'll be more and more of those days ahead for us when we'll get up to 90 and beyond with renewables, and we can dial it down. But we can't walk away from it for a couple of reasons. We need energy security. And if we don't have that, which gas provides at the moment, we undermine our whole transition. Because the minute the lights go out, the minute the AC can't be turned on, is the minute we lose public support for this transition. And already, now this is a great room, you're on board, but there's a whole lot of people that hate the idea of wind farms, that hate the idea of EVs, so they're looking for any excuse, and they often use any excuse they can find to oppose the transition. Some of them just don't like it. They don't like it. And so if we fail, and there's an issue because we don't have enough firming gas in the system, then we lose the support of the wider public for this very important mission. It's expensive, it's complicated, it's not easy, but it needs to happen.
Okay, thanks, Reece. Rachel, you'd like to come in at this point?
I'm not an energy expert, but I have been working in health for a long time, and I just think it's really important to educate folk and raise awareness of issues, And I think if people understood that by reducing emissions, we will all be healthier. It's not just the environment, but even in our homes we'll be healthier if we can get off gas. And I hear this from my community as well when we're talking about asthma, for example, and a lot of them weren't aware that gas in homes increases the incidence of childhood asthma. And I don't want to scare people by talking about all the things that are released by gas stoves even when they're turned off. but it is methane. It's fine particulate matter that is inhaled and it goes into your bloodstream. It's carbon monoxide, it's nitrogen dioxide. These things are not good for us. So I just think an awareness campaign, education of the health benefits of electrification, and of course rebates to enable that. I have patients who work in green industry, and they tell me that they have lost investors because there aren't those targets, the 2030 interim targets, and no renewable energy targets. So, as I say, I'm no energy expert. I'm just telling you about the conversations I've had and the health issues that I am aware of.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll put this question to Steve because he hasn't had an opportunity to say anything. If the Liberals are in power, or I should say if and when the Liberals are in power, a big blocker for new renewable energy is seen as the transmission constraint. As you know, we're in the process of building. If you were in the driving seat, Steve, or you were the energy minister, what would you be doing? What would your plan would be to reduce this hurdle for wide-scale transmission rollout?
Well, certainly there's an issue that there will have to be an additional transmission lines constructed. I don't think Reece disagrees with that. I think that we're going to have a significant amount. The government came up with a number at one point, which was 4,000 kilometres of additional line. I think they simply took 10% of the national body's best guess, and so 4,000 kilometres is really a nonsense number. And as I understand it, the Office of Energy and Western Power are now going through the process to work out how much additional distribution is required. So that's as yet an unknown number. Reece might be able to give us a quick announcement today that he's got the exact number. But there is more that needs to be constructed. The other issue is that one of the differences between the Liberal Party and the Labor Party is I'm a much bigger believer in distributed generation and distributed storage. The government is very much in favour of centralised distribution and centralised storage and centralised generation. So what I'd like to see is a greater investment. You might have seen an ABC article a couple of weeks ago where I think Brad and I actually agree that the home battery stuff and that distributed storage is a really important component. But that doesn't take away the need for large-scale distribution. That number hasn't been arrived at yet. But if you look at 330 kVA lines at what, $6 to $8 million a kilometre, it's a multi-billion-dollar exercise to get that through. It's a very expensive process.
But would you commit to funding that and planning as a plan-led recovery? You would invest in common user infrastructure and then recover that investment through system use charges? Is that how you go about it? Or would you expect industry to contribute majorly to that?
So I'm a big believer in the what we used to have was the contributory scheme, where government would significantly invest in distribution, and I think we need to maintain that government investment in distribution. And you do, but look, there will be private sector individual companies where it's a generator straight to a user. In that case, a build, own and operate by a private generator, I've got absolutely no problem with.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Sorry, Reece, you'll get a chance to respond. And this next question is, with half the transition coming from consumer energy, and with such high rooftop solar penetration in WA, and I don't know if you know, but only 0.3% of rooftop solar in WA has home batteries. What will the various parties do to support home batteries? Reece, this is the time to announce the home battery scheme. We have been last week was health. And this week is energy, so we were really hoping this is your opportunity to...
Fraser, I don't often wish I was Roger Cook. Maybe this is one of those occasions. Look, the issue of the role of the home and distributive energy is critical. I mean, we've led the nation with Project Symphony, which many of your audience members will know about. I fundamentally believe this is the democratisation of energy. We've stepped away from the old days of the big power utility owning and running everything. There's a market out there. There's also, we want market investment in transmission, but importantly, it's what's happening in the home. I mean, up in Exmouth, for instance, we're experimenting and exploring vehicle to grid generation. So, you know, the EVs up there, they get power during the day, feeding back into the grid at night, which will be great because, you know, with tourism increasing and EVs increasing, that could actually be a great assistance to Exmouth. But the announcement you want me to make, I'm not the Premier, but look, what I will tell you is we've laid the groundwork for this through legislation in the last Parliament that allows more to change what were very, very old legislation, which had no idea about new technology, to ensure that new technology can be allowed to exist and the benefits come to householders. So I know, you know, the amount of rooftop solar is incredible. We're putting on every year in Western Australia 250 megawatts of new capacity and new generation through rooftop solar.
Modular reactor every year.
Well, it's about what Steve wants to invest in terms of gas. Now, I know they're different forms of energy, but you know, so the opportunities are there. We don't want it to go to waste. That's why we're building big scale batteries to soak it up and dispatch it in the evening. But yeah, look, it is something I have many conversations with many people. I understand the desire.
Okay, thank you, Reece. That was your opportunity, but anyway, thanks for that positive feedback. It's good to see. Okay, so this is a general question here. Getting out of coal reduces WA emissions by less than 5%. That's the overall emissions. I know it's 80% of the state's emissions, but less than 5%. The main source of WA emissions comes from gas. So, and we've asked this question before, but I'll rephrase it and ask Brad to maybe answer it. What would be your plan, Brad, for transition away from gas? And I'm not talking about gas in gas generation, because that's, you know, there's a lot of focus on that, but as we know, that's is a reasonable percentage. It's the other stuff that everyone says is hard to decarbonize, which we know is subtext for saying come back next year, because, you know, because it's not easy. And the question is, you know, Reece mentioned the fact that if there's a green premium for products, then companies will make the change. But, you know, there's some thought to say that if you're making a major change in industrial policy, generally that's led by government. And you know, it's obviously a partnership. You need a market there, but you also need a bit of a help. So, Brad, what would be the Greens policy if you were trying to tackle that? You know, we know who it is. Yeah, I mentioned the names before. You know, Yarra, South 32, Alcoa, etc. Yeah. So, and to them, yeah.
Well, so broadly, I think these are the harder bits to decarbonise, but they're ones where there is a really important role for government to play a role and accelerate those, because these are the key ones around. And we could and we should see those big energy users like Alcoa and South 32 being incentivised a lot of their plant is old. I think South 32 is still running off coal. Am I right to say that? You know, so we're talking really, really old. And there's a really important role for government to work with the industry around providing the right incentives to get them to leapfrog gas in this case. And this is another classic one. South 32, I think, is about to upgrade to gas. And which is, of course, several levels of stupid. Because why is not government stepping in and saying, don't do that, skip that upgrade and go straight to renewables, because it can be done. And so there is, and this plays into a bigger, if I can just expand this out a bit, a bigger point. We have just given approval to the North West Shelf to run to 2070. There's no real intention to get out of gas. I mean, this is part of my frustration. We've just approved, we're just approving gas project upon gas project. Scarborough, Browse, and with Scott Reef won't be far behind. And this is, and then we just add fracking in there of the Kimberley, which for some bizarre reason we still are allowing. We need a serious plan to get out of gas. Now, that is not to say that we're shutting down, I'm not shutting down gas tomorrow, but let's work with the industry, and ultimately acknowledge that the future for WA isn't in gas. It is as a renewable energy superpower, one that we actually land some green hydrogen projects. Look, and I'm not a big fan of hydrogen, but I do think there will be a role for it. But there will be a huge role for WA with its vast wind and solar resources and land resources to play a really big role in that. But we're not doing that because you know what? We just keep investing in gas.
Thanks, Brad. I'd like to bring Steve in the response to how would you help WA industry decarbonise the gas users. So that's the primary question, and it's not, and we recognise it's not easy, because it was easy, they would have done it already. So the question is, what would a Liberal government do to do, or would they do anything at all?
So, Fraser, I was particularly interested in responding to Brad when he talked about those big companies. And I can tell you, having moved around and worked around them, and again, maybe Reece has probably done the same thing, most of those companies are approached by renewable energy proponents all the time. They are always out there. They are looking to sell their product. There's a whole pile of largely internationally funded wind farm proposals out there. There are tens and tens of megawatts of proposal, big gigawatts. You know, these projects are 10 gigawatts each, some of them. There's more than the state could ever absorb. And these people are out there knocking on doors trying to find a market for their product. And the biggest issue that these companies have all the time is cost. And cost has sort of escaped us in this debate, Fraser. It's one of those things where we've gone, oh, it's really cheap to shift to renewables. The costs that the renewable proponents are bringing to these companies are far and beyond above the costs of other energy sources. And so that's the biggest issue that you have to address. These companies cannot function. They close down under some of these proposals. And I know perhaps that's not the reality that a lot of people here would like to hear, and I don't expect to get a round of applause for it. But sometimes you actually have to listen to the reality, and the reality is these companies would shift if it was economically viable as quickly as they possibly could, because their international marketplaces want them to decarbonise as quickly as they can. If it was only so easy that you could wave a magic wand and make it happen, that would be fantastic.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Thanks for that. I know everyone's itching to jump in here. We'll just try and get through some questions. Right, this is, again, another gas-related questions, but at a domestic level. Will the next WA government, it could be you, Rachel, I never know, commit to having no gas at all in future housing and apartment builds, as in Victoria? Now, you know, if Bill Johnston was here, he would give me a lecture about, you know, the numbers and everything else, and it's 2/3 of nothing. But I think everyone knows, understands the relationship between gas use at home, rather than the health issues, and the idea about social license and propping up large-scale development. So there's a connection there. So what's your thoughts about gas-free, all-electric homes from the get-go, more efficient, lower life cycle cost, everything else? What's better health outcomes?
From households for gas is quite low, but I think it's an important number. And Rachel mentioned the health issues. I think we can electrify our homes and get gas out of our domestic scene a lot sooner than we can eliminate it from the broader economy. Now, I'm always in favour of a carrot rather than a stick approach. There are many developers who've already opening up new subdivisions in Perth that don't have the gas line on, and I've commended them and I've encouraged the development industry to do more of that. But I think Rachel mentioned the education issue. And I know there's a lot of doctors for climate change who also emphasise this. The health issues about gas in the home with young children and respiratory issues, we need to understand that more. We need to talk about it more. We need to get rid of this mentality that it's natural gas and somehow it's organic and good for us. That blue flame that is great for cooking. The new electric, cooktops are much more responsive and precise with their heat settings. I want to get chefs out there talking about how they can cook with electricity and it's better than cooking with gas. So that is important. Now, do I want to go down the Victorian road? And no, I want to convince people of the need to do the right thing. I also, if you're a struggling family right now and you've got a perfectly good serviceable gas cooker in your home, I don't think we should be expecting them to be replaced. We can do more in terms of looking at what we can do for social housing, and I think that's important. And we do have programs in collaboration with the federal government in terms of that. But I think education and I think understanding the benefits of electrifying. I'm a great fan of Saul Griffiths as well. I've read every one of his books. I've met him a couple of times, sought him out. He's a great guy. He's a practical guy who can, tell a good story, and he's passionate about it. But I think his passion is fueled about enabling people to take charge rather than, telling them what they should do.
Okay. Yeah, the question was about new builds rather than retrofits, but I take the point, Reece. We've got a question from Engineers Australia, Max. I think Max is in the audience. There you go, Max. I got your question. $20 well invested, don't worry. Engineers Australia is calling for the next state government to develop a structured plan to achieve net zero 2050. Will the panelists commit to doing that? So it's a structured plan that demonstrates above and beyond what we have already, the sectoral emission reduction strategies, an actual concrete plan. So who wants to? Steve, I haven't heard you. Would you like to?
Go from the right to the left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
right to left.
right.
Well,
Yeah.
then I'm Trumpland.
Well, yeah.
I'm the far right.
There's not many people to the right of me, I've got to say, Fraser. There you go. No, it's a great question, Engineers Australia. Thank you for that. Obviously, if we're committed to net carbon neutral by 2050, net zero by 2050, then obviously we have to have a plan to get there. We haven't announced an entire plan as yet. There's a few things happening, including state and federal elections, that will impact on that. It's going to take us a little while to deliver that particular plan, but we are determined to get to net carbon neutral by 2050. Pricing out carbon is going to be a part of that component without having a national price on carbon. But the international marketplace will play a role in that because it's starting to price carbon by itself. So that plays a role. The work on distribution plays a significant role. And so we will have a plan. It's not the current government's plan. It will look a bit different. But I say this to industry all the time. One of the best things about Western Australia is that whether it's Reece or I, we have very similar outcomes at the end of the day. We are going further into renewables. We have a net carbon neutral by 2050 plan. We both agree on those things. The argument is only on how we get there, and that's what you're looking for, is that roadmap to get there. It's a little bit early yet, but I think it'll come from both the major parties over the next 5 years.
Reece, do you want to add to that?
I think what's missing from the debate tonight is the safeguard mechanism at the federal level. I mean, so many of our emissions come from those large-scale projects. And the Albanese government has actually strengthened and made that effective, which it wasn't before. And so much of Western Australia's emissions come from the Pilbara and are from safeguard facilities. So the fact that they have a legislative requirement to progressively reduce emissions at those large emitters, that's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting in Australia in terms of getting to net zero. So that's important. The other thing I'll just add in terms of the opportunities that you talked about, there's a program up in the Pilbara, again, where a lot of the state's emissions are, the big heavy emitters are up in the Pilbara. For the first time, this government has made huge progress in planning out the construction of a true network of poles and wires that don't exist there right now. It's all, each company has their own energy production and network. Getting those guys to talk and cooperate has been a breakthrough. Getting them to talk to communities and Aboriginal communities in that area that want to be part of the solution, that know the value of their land for generation of renewables, that is a huge undertaking, and we're having great success. So if we can deliver a true network in the NWIS, that will have an amazing impact on creating an affordable market for generation to enter because there's huge demand and load in that area, and that will do a lot to reducing our emissions in Western Australia.
Okay. Thank you, Reece. Brad, would you like to, and then Rachel, would you like to add to that? So this is the net zero 2050 plan in terms of decarbonisation. So
I'd start by making the point that I think plans for 2050 good, but not much use unless they have a serious chunk of that plan actually happens way before. I think sometimes the WA plan is to keep emissions high to about 2049 when they suddenly drop off a cliff. Because there's and also just no accountability. So actually that's why I'm 2050 plan, sure, let's know where we're going, but let's make sure that most of the work of that plan happens over the next decade ahead, because that's when we're accountable. I think safeguard, by a distant back of my brain, about 40% of emissions, I think it covers.
WA.
Yeah, about 40% of WA's emissions. It's a big chunk.
Big chunk.
But there's still 60% it doesn't cover. And where's the plan for that? For anyone who looked at the sectoral emissions reduction strategy document, can I be blunt about that? That document was literally embarrassing. It was a descriptor. If someone had given me that when I was a university lecturer, I would have given them a fail. Because it was in no way was that a strategy to get us anywhere. It was a description of what we're already doing, which is not much. And so, but we need a plan. In fact, and I think it'll be really exciting. And because that's around transport. Now, 18% of our emissions are transport. Around agriculture, which is about 15%. Around the built environment, our city, where again, we've got a good about 20% of emissions are from that. There is no plan for any of that. And this is the low-hanging fruit. We shouldn't be relying on the hard stuff in the Pilbara and the safeguard mechanism, but the low-hanging fruit that actually happens in our big city, where we actually really could, with the right government leadership, get things done now.
No, thanks, Brad. Rachel, do you want to add something to that? I mean, Rachel, I appreciate you don't have a team behind you. You're not part of a political party, so you don't have a large policy team. So I'm not expecting you to pull ideas out your hat, but I want you the opportunity to contribute to the discussion. So
You're being very kind to me tonight. I appreciate that. No, I don't have a team, but I have been speaking to energy experts over the last number of years, which is partly why I'm here now, because they were telling me things that were very disappointing. And of course, more recently, I have been doing a deep dive into lots of different energy policy. And what I'm hearing, just as Brad said, 2050, it simply isn't good enough. We need interim targets, something to aim for. We know that whatever it is in life, if we want to achieve something, we have to set a goal, and then we are much more likely to achieve that goal. My constituents are really, really worried about climate change and the environmental degradation they are seeing. We've had the hottest year last year, the hottest start to this year. We need action now, not in 2049 or closer to that time. So yeah, a structured plan that is enacted soon. But also I often think, and this is going to sound a bit crazy maybe, why don't we have a department for copying great ideas? Go to the Netherlands, where they've had no gas connections in new homes since 2018. South Australia, where you saw on that chart earlier, I think it was yours, Brad's, all those different rebates that have been brought in to enable home electrification, slashing costs for families, and of course reducing emissions and making homes safer. Why don't we copy other countries that do it well?
thanks very much. So we've got a couple of questions that are related, and we've sort of half answered them before, and it's around about connection for new wind and solar, is getting a connection from Western Power, and the other question, related question, is Western Power is a state-owned monopoly in WA, and we as the state government, aren't we? You guys as the state government, committed to funding the transmission build required for new generation. So we have talked around the issue, but I guess one of the things that we're seeing is that in other areas, other government and in other jurisdictions around the world have dedicated renewable energy zones. And in those zones, the government builds the infrastructure, the transmission infrastructure, and then welcomes industry into those areas, knowing that the approval process for those zones has been mapped out, that there's transmission capacity and people can invest in those areas with confidence. So it's providing a clear signal to industry that we're committed by having these renewable energy zones. And I know renewable energy zones or hubs appeared in the Swiss demand assessment. Maybe, Reece, what's your thoughts behind that? Is, really giving it's like developing a new industrial area, isn't it? Strategic industrial area.
Absolutely.
You set out all the services, and then investors come in. So can you maybe address that relation to?
Well, it touches on what I talked about before, particularly in the northwest where there are enormous opportunities. And the Australian Renewable Energy Hub, which is a massive undertaking at the moment and has the support of BP and others, linking that, what we're providing through our network in the NWIS is providing that transmission, working with the major companies up there who are going to be wanting to produce the energy and also to use it, to making sure the transmission is available. So, we can have that investment, and there are other areas throughout the state where we're looking at areas where we can provide the work on the ground, the site works and the electricity and the connections. So the other thing I'll say about Western Power, thank goodness it is still in the control of the state, because I talked to my colleagues around the country. They're having a devil of a time in the transmission of corralling these private companies and getting them to cooperate with each other in determining what needs to be done. I think Queensland and Western Australia have retained our poles and wire network under public ownership, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a unique set of circumstances that NWIS came into being when the mining companies said we can't do this by ourselves and we need state investment. They saw that. The question really is more about Swiss renewable energy zones, and that's probably the challenge. But Steve, do you want to come in and talk on?
Thank you. And as politically dangerous it is for me to agree with Reece, the reality is that you can't just have open slather in relation to connections into the Southwest Integrated System. I mean, we are a very big area. We're a big state with very few people in it, and actually not very much industry by comparison to lots of the other marketplaces. So there's not room for all the proponents that are out there. The problem if you just have open slather and start throwing out, for example, the Geograph Bay wind farm zone, which is a dreadful place to actually have a wind farm zone. And I think we both agree that onshore is far better than offshore. Yeah. You interfere with the cultural attachment of people to what is an iconic area. It's the Hervey Bay of Western Australia, for the people who know what that means. So just having open slather is of no value. There are also more projects out there than we need, and more projects out there that are actually good for the Southwest Interconnected System. So it has to be a managed approach. I mean, you can either approach this completely ideologically, and that might be half the audience, but I'm hoping that the other half of the audience is approaching this from a very practical manner. And the practical manner that Reece has enunciated is you can't just have it open. You have to plan and strategise these all the way through to make sure the projects that get up are the ones that you need, and they're providing the energy that you need at a rate that you need. You just cannot open it all up and give everybody a free hit.
That, if I can just quickly add, that work's going on has been underway in the last term of government. So we're looking at where in the Swiss the areas where renewables and solar and wind are going to make sense. So one example is at the back of Narrogin and Williams Way, where it can feed into Collie and then hook into the rest of the network through the infrastructure that already exists. So what are the areas where it makes sense? You don't want to crisscross the countryside with transmission. You need to plan it properly. Yeah. So that's happening now.
Yeah, okay. That's good to know. I think one of the things that we've said to government is that I think you need to probably communicate a little bit better. I think the communication by government could be better. Yeah. And I know it's very difficult, but in terms, I think we've talked before about bad faith actors, and when you have a communication vacuum, it gets filled by bad faith actors. So I think
there's a funny process around engaging with the community. When you take that first step to engage, people will say, well, why didn't you ask me about this? Yeah. We're doing that now. So there's that process that has to happen.
Yeah, and then you get shouted down when you do try and communicate them. So it's a bit tricky, but thanks for that, Reece. Right, this is an ongoing question. We pay more on car radio from WA earns in revenue from the gas industry. This is a recurring theme. If we could dial back time to the 1970s and get it right. But how do we combat state capture at this critical period for the transition and climate action? I hinted at the fact that the transition is about politics and politics of power, and we kind of know that people have influence on government policy. So the question really is, for the audience, how can we counter this influence and generate more revenue from the resources that we have and counter the influence of parties whose interests are short term. Their interests aren't necessarily aligned with community interests.
Well, I think we look ahead at what needs to be done. Investing billions of dollars right now in transmission, it's probably not going. The benefit of that is not going to be realised in the next 4 years. But it'll start to be. But it's a big investment. So, I don't believe we're captured. I believe that, and I'm sure there are people happy to disagree with that. But look, we also have very rigorous processes in this state. We have an EPA, we have an appeals convener, we have, we have a process of public engagement.
Yeah.
We have a rigorous parliament with colleagues seated either side of me. I get to be in the position to make a final decision on these things, but there's a very rigorous road, and in fact, the criticism has been that these things take years and years and years. I've been an advocate for a more efficient system with retaining the rigour that we need to ensure that there are good outcomes. Look, some people will never want some sort of project to go ahead, and government can be tough. It's very easy to look at a group of your constituents and want to please them by always saying the things that they want to hear. But parties of government have to govern for the whole population, and we'll get competing views across the spectrum. We have to strike a balance, which probably doesn't always probably makes everyone a little unhappy.
Yeah, you can see that, can't you? So, there was a very successful disinformation campaign against the Bunbury offshore wind zone. Now offshore wind, wicked. I know is an issue because some people support it, some people don't, just from a technical perspective. But I think the most important thing is not to think about whether offshore wind has got better merits than onshore wind, and you should use the cheaper resources before the more expensive one. The real thing really here was it was a very effective disinformation campaign, and it was directed at a particular area of development. So the question for the audience is, whether the speakers, is what can be done to counter that successful influence of these campaigns? Because these campaigns, it's one time it's a yes campaign, next means offshore wind, and the next thing it's going to be the clean energy link. So there's a lot of bad face actors there. So question for the speakers, Rachel, we haven't heard from you for. So how would you treat these bad faith actors? You'd probably give them some sort of medication, would you? Or what's your?
Yeah, we probably all need some form of medication, don't we? Once again, it's education and awareness. Having a state-led campaign to educate everyone and just to tell them the truth. I just believe in letting everybody know the truth and doing things right. And I leant forward to the microphone simply because there is a statistic that I read recently about the UK, which is where you may be able to tell I originally came from 30 years ago. And their energy generation on the 18th of December last year was, on that one day, was nearly 70% from wind. So sharing those stories so people aren't so scared about wind turbines. I think that kind of thing, again, is helpful. And once more, the copying. Let's see where, other countries and states do it well and just do the same. Don't reinvent the wheel. But yeah, education to counter misinformation.
Okay, I think, Brad, would you like to answer that? Because we all know I think we all share that concern about these disinformation campaigns, because it's,
frustrating, and it's extremely difficult at the moment because we're in a world of disinformation. But I would say, I think offshore wind, the evidence is increasingly strong that the environmental impacts can be managed and it can be done well. And certainly, the position of my party and myself is that we support that done well. And but it should be like all renewable energy. We should be rolling that out in a way that takes the community on the journey. We shouldn't be clearing bushland. There's a whole bunch of things that we shouldn't be doing as we roll out what should be a huge rollout. I mean, look, again, we are extremely lucky as a state. We've got so much land to use, and we don't need to kind of create enemies along the way as we do it unnecessarily. So part of my response to that is actually let's just do it well. And again, there's a role for government in this. At the moment, the way that renewable energy rolls out in this state is developer-led, largely. It's basically a developer comes out and says, I want to do it here. There is no actual, and this is where I think the whole of system plan actually could have been much more of a plan, which sounds like the work that's happening now, around actually saying, here's where we want it, and here's the criteria, which is that you don't clear native bushland to put your wind turbines in or your solar farm in, or to put your transmission in. We do it in a way that touches the earth lightly and gently because we can do that. We are extraordinarily lucky around being able to do that. And that is actually the way we tackle this, the pushback against renewable energy is actually doing it well. And I think that we just need to plan it better and roll it out better.
Okay, thanks. Reece, would you like to talk about, I know, I mean, you've got a journalist background, so you understand all about disinformation. I'm not suggesting you spread any, but you can understand the concern.
Well,
about...
you might, I might, you know, I don't always think some of my former colleagues do a good job.
Yeah, right.
In you know, they love the story and the headline, but and I mentioned this before, some people are really, there's a group of people that are really triggered by renewable energy.
Yep.
And they say, and it's not restricted to offshore wind, it's
all
sorts of renewables.
Exactly.
And yes, the planning is important to get right, and communities have to be brought along and engaged with, and there is that work going on. But I do think in a polarised atmosphere and what's happening in the US and increasingly with social media, the disinformation is crazy. You know, the people that I believe never heard of a whale before are suddenly concerned about, or you know, offshore turbines leaking oil everywhere, you know, or exploding into flames suddenly.
Yeah.
You know, it's quite irrational, but you know, there's some really bad faith players out there, and that's something we just have to deal with. But I think you're right. Education, engagement. We need to talk to communities, and I guess as people in Parliament and people in elected positions, we need to stand up, even when those people are, you know, on our side. We need to call them to account and say, you're actually wrong about the statements you're making.
Yeah. Steve, would you like to add to that? And the other dimension to this is that you know, the trust in government is, you know, not this particular government, is you know, on the wane. You know, that's the other thing. So something you wonder, maybe you should be funding, you know, civil society groups to help communicate. But you know,
hopefully we are a civil society. Look, no, I do absolutely want to add to this. So I'm the Liberal that for 20 years has believed in climate change and supported renewable energy. And I tell you, I get a fair bit of flack in certain circles because of that. And I think Brad knows, because we've had these debates in Parliament, because I've stood up and said so on multiple occasions. And I actually support wind farms where I think they're appropriate. And so Reece is in the process of looking at potentially putting one in the Scott River. And that's a reasonably good project because I think it's on farmland, and in particular, it picks up the existing infrastructure that exists, the 300 kVA line that runs across, that's already existing through state forest that somebody built many years ago for the Beanup mine. And that I've copped flack for that as well. So I do support the renewable energy projects when they're appropriate and they're right and they work. But here's a surprise, not every renewable project is right and perfect and works. And if the concept at the start that I have to adopt is that every project in the renewable sector is perfect, then we're going to just simply agree to disagree. There is a reason that the offshore wind turbines are not ideal. Now, they may well work quite effectively in the Midwest, and I think we probably should look at that area. And in fact, the federal Liberal member up there is actually quite open to having offshore wind turbines in that area. Geograph Bay is iconic for a lot of reasons. And there has been a massive misinformation campaign from proponents around what the impacts of that are likely to be. Now, if you believe the Gen Cost report, and unlike some of my federal colleagues, I read the Gen Cost report and I take very good bits out of that. Offshore wind is 3 times the price of onshore wind.
Yeah, Steve, the question is really about countering disinformation out in the community rather than, promoting one technology over another. So it's really about what the government's role is in managing that, because, it's a social cohesion issue. It's.
But with due respect, Fraser, you started your question originally with misinformation about the offshore wind proposal in Geograph Bay. And so I kind of take exception to that a bit, because there's misinformation on both sides of that argument. I haven't talked about environmental impacts in Wales. I've talked about social impacts. No, that's right. So, and look, the government and I agree on this. I mean, we've government ministers out there saying this is not a priority for this government, and it's not. And it's not because Reece's side or I are opposed to renewable energy. It is because this particular zone in this particular area is not the right outcome for Western Australia. And also, if we have to accept everyone as important and everyone as perfect, then we're just going to argue over it.
Okay, thanks, Steve. This is a question. Many renters are stuck living in accommodation with poor energy efficiency, high energy bills, and apathy from the landlord to invest in efficiency. So this is the idea where there's no immediate benefit for the landlord, there's benefit for the renter, and you get this kind of impasse. What is the speaker's view about that? Brad, you've got the microphone itching up. How would you fix it?
We did a policy announcement on this a couple of weeks ago, because I think this is a really interesting space. And we've seen, so Victoria is probably the gold standard about this at the moment, where they've actually got a scheme where shared solar with renters and incentives for landlords to put solar in and those kind of things, I think are really good. So we would like to see something similar here, where actually where the cost is shared, the cost and the benefits are shared both with the renter and the landlord. Because 1/3 of West Australians rent, 700,000 West Australians rent, and they should benefit from solar energy as well. And then I would say the other bit is minimum standards, where our rentals here don't have minimum standards around insulation, energy efficiency. That just should be a basic. If you want to rent out your place, can we please make sure it has insulation? And I would say that applies to government social housing as well, where we've had people contact us saying, I've asked the government, my house is 36 degrees inside. I've asked for insulation on my public housing, and the government said I have to pay for it myself. I mean, that kind of stuff's crazy. I mean, it's the low-hanging fruit. We need to be actually making rentals part of the transition.
Reece, do you want to add something to the idea of tenants and landlords? And
we're already doing practical things. I mean, I can mention the energy credits. I can mention the household utility grants. There's a program where anyone can put their hand up and get an audit about the way they operate their home, and the fridge in the shed that's got nothing in it, that's on all day, and just practical, real information that could make them reduce their energy usage substantially. So all that goes on. There's also partnerships with the federal government in terms of where the state is the landlord, working out infrastructure investment that could reduce costs. I think it's something we need to keep looking at. I do believe that we need to do more, because in a cost of living situations we're in now, energy bills are significant, part of the household budget, and there's more that we need to do. We need to ensure that the transition, the benefit flows through to everyone. All too often, as you said, you've got the money to pay for that rooftop solar and the battery. That's great for you, but the people that need it even more than you can't afford it. So we need to look at what we can do there as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Reece. Rachel, do you want to add anything to that? You've done 4,500 door knockings. Presumably, some of those are renters. Are they? Is that sort of feedback that you're getting from community? Is that they see the transition passing them by, and those who are in need of cost of living relief are being passed by? What was the feedback?
Absolutely. It is a struggle for renters. We know landlords are making more and more money. The value of houses and apartments that they've been going up for years now. But for renters, they don't have the advantage of that value. They're just paying more and more rent. There are landlords out there who we all know don't care that much. So we do need government-led policy to enforce these things. there are some exceptional initiatives, like in North Fremantle recently, I visited a development there in Congdon Street. You know that?
Yeah.
And that was developed with an amazing architect, Michelle Blakely. And those units, there were 18, I think, put up in about 22 days, the basic frame. So these were built quickly, and they were built with energy efficiency and, with the rising temperatures in mind. So I'd love to see those kind of initiatives spread out over more of the state.
Okay. But one more question before we open the mic up. The question is, Premier Cook has referred several times to WA's green energy plan. Who is responsible for delivering it, and where can we find a copy? So I don't know if it's a generic plan or there's an actual plan. I don't know.
This stuff is serious. There is not just me. I obviously have a significant role through my portfolios. The Premier, the Deputy Premier, the Planning Minister, other ministers are part of a subcommittee of Cabinet. So we want to deliver change and new infrastructure to allow this to happen. And it's not just a set of forget where we say we're going to do that and walk away. The DGs come back to us every 2 months with an update. So it is significant. I mean, we're doing new things all the time. I talked about the grid-scale batteries, which nation-leading, Project Symphony, nation-leading. The other day we were in Kalgoorlie, where we announced that we will build a 50-megawatt vanadium flow battery. The biggest one in the country at the moment, I think, is 2 megawatts in South Australia. There's a great celebration when that opened. I think Japan might have a 36 megawatt or thereabouts. The only really large ones are in China at 100 megawatts. So for Kalgoorlie to be getting a 50 megawatt vanadium flow battery is significant. The beauty about these batteries, it's Australian technology, invented here in New South Wales actually, but Australian technology. It uses a resource that is plentiful in Western Australia, so it's going to up an ability to supply the vanadium. Vanadium can be used again and again. Everything can be recycled. It's fairly basic technology, 10-hour duration. 10-hour duration. So, and it can withstand the intense heat of Western Australia. Makes a lot of sense. We're already experimenting with a vanadium battery in Kununurra on the Horizon grid in that town. So this is significant things. If we develop this industry, we can be exporting vanadium batteries to the world. The whole supply chain can be found in Western Australia. So yes, we want to be a green energy superpower. That's just one way we can do it.
All right. Okay, thanks for that. Aria, we got Peter. You don't want to ask a question? Yeah. Okay. There's a mic just here, so we'll open the mic up to people who can ask a question, and Peter's going to give a demonstration of how to ask a question.
Thanks. Pete, Bevan Cole. Steve and Reece, as Energy Minister in a couple of weeks, you're obviously directly responsible for government facilities, but you're also responsible for the whole feed works and the lights stay on. An important part of is Blue Waters Power Station. All right, so Synergy is going to close down stations. That will make the coal mines less viable because of less volume. The coal mines are pretty useless anyway. As Energy Minister, what is your position on what you expect to happen at Blue Power Station, Blue Waters Station, and what would you do to ensure that the renewable generation or gas is there to replace it and lights don't go on? This is a huge unknown in the system.
Yes. It is a tricky dance getting out of coal, generally out of Collie. The timing has to be right. It's not a sustainable resource down there. The mines are getting less productive. The resource is running out. The kit down there, the generation kit, is basically built in the 1960s. It is old. So if you want to keep running it and waiting for nuclear, you will be in all sorts of bother because it simply will not last the distance, either the supply of coal or the old ageing coal-fired generation, which brings into question whether if you do want to run it for much longer, what is the investment you make in billions of dollars on coal power stations? And I'm not sure that there's be much of an appetite for that in Western Australia. The question of blue water, it's obviously a very important power source, but importantly, the difference between this summer and last summer in terms of our overall capacity, driven by new generation, but also battery storage, has been about an extra gigawatt of capacity. Every year, the rooftop solar is increasing 250 megawatts. Having grid-scale batteries to soak that up and dispatch it at night means we can be more secure. So yes, we're building our new generation. Batteries are important. People say batteries aren't generators. That's right. But if you have lots of excess capacity, as we do in the Swiss through rooftop solar, you can store that and it becomes a source of power when you need it. So I'm confident, and we've looked at the numbers in terms of if we'll keep Blue Waters running until we make a careful and strategic exit. But if for instance, there was an issue tomorrow, I'm confident that the system would be able to cope.
Okay, thanks for that.
Can I add?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, Steve.
Sort of both sides of the argument here. So this is a great question, Peter, because it relates to the capacity to keep the lights on at a price that the Western Australian consumer can afford. And whilst domestic electricity prices are capped, so the ERA recommends how much they can go up, and it goes up 2.5% to 3.5%. Most business clients in the last 12 months have had increases between 25% and 40% on their electricity contracts. They have been massive increases. Now, the state government is currently subsidising Griffin Coal to supply Blue Waters Power Station to the tune of $260 million. It ends in June next year, June 2026. That $250,000 basically holds that coal in place. But then the government also seems to be doing its absolute best to shut down Blue Waters Power Station in the interim. So in 2027, the government is proposing to get rid of Collier. It will have closed down Muja 6 by that point, and is also doing its best to get rid of Blue Waters 1 and 2. That's 1,000 megawatts that's disappearing out of the system. And there is no way that the system in this state can absorb that. It is a 10-year plan, in my view, to be able to close down the 1,300 megawatts of coal that currently exists. And in that period of time, you have to build alternatives. There is no way in the world the government will be able to do that in the time frame. So right now, we're looking at this crazy situation. I mean, the government imported 103,000 tonnes of coal from New South Wales, cost somewhere between 50 and 100 million bucks. That was to keep the lights on 2 years ago. They're still trying to burn the last of it. They're proposing to prop up Griffin Coal for $250 million until basically the middle of next year, when it all falls apart and an insolvent company just goes back to being an insolvent company. And at the same time, they're trying to close down Blue Waters as well as the coal fleet in that order. And at that point, so 2027 is the crisis year. It's not this year. It'd be great for the opposition if the crisis year was this year, because like 2008, when the Conservatives won government, a lot of that came on the back of blackouts because the then Labor government couldn't keep the power on. So 2027 is the crisis year. 1,000 megawatts goes out. You basically destroy the business case of Blue Waters because the government won't give them back their contracts at Synergy and Water Corporation, and the whole system falls apart. So this is my prediction. In 2 years' time, there's not enough new renewables in the system. There's not enough distribution. There's not enough storage, and the system is on the verge of collapse. And if you want to see that in advance, go and have a look what's happening in Victoria at the moment, because the Victorian system that's gone down this, interim targets path, and offshore wind is in a disastrous state. The last thing I'd add is the power stations in Collie, the issue is the price of the coal, and Reece is absolutely right. The strip ratios when I first started there were about 4-1. They're now over 20-1 in many cases, out to a peak of 24-1. It's an expensive process. But the Collier was built they weren't all built in the 60s. Muja A and B were. Collier was built in the 90s, and the Blue Water power stations under the Gallop government, which I think was before, I think Reece was a journalist at the West Australian at the time, was built in the 2000s. So some of that coal fleet is very old, but some of that coal fleet is not. And this government, or my government, whichever government it is for the next 10 years, is going to be relying on that coal fleet to maintain supply, keep the lights on at a price that consumers, including small business, can afford until the transition is in place, and that's at least a decade down the track.
Okay.
Can I just please?
we had record demand, significant demand this summer, a new record. We had a significant buffer with excess generation.
Just down a number.
The other thing that you forget, there's a market out there that allows companies to get into that. But the other thing is there is a capacity mechanism system. There's you can talk about what the government is or isn't doing, but you overlook the fact there's a market there which forecasts demand and private companies can enter into that. Those who are demand of the system can also enter into that. That ensures that the demand is being, every couple of years, the demand is being met, a significant buffer, an increased buffer has been built into the system that was never there before.
Yeah, okay, it's good to know. Question from the lady up here, there with her hand up. Peter Kerr, you got a question or not? No.
Hello, thanks very much to all the speakers. It's been a very interesting discussion. However, I don't know, Reece Whitby, how you can sit there and say that the EPA is a strong protector of our environment. It has been emasculated during the course of this government in the last. You can't, the disconnect between all the good things that you say the government is doing, and I applaud you for whatever is good that is being done, but how can you then sign off on Woodside getting the licence to expand their project at the Burrup Peninsula? Incidentally, which also involves...
So can Reece respond to that question? So the question is, how can you sign off on the North West Shelf extension? Can we just leave the question at that?
Oh, well, okay. The other question I want to ask is about the wave farm that was about 10 years ago. That was very popular.
Let Reece respond to the North West Shelf question and let others answer another question. If you've got more questions,
we'll come to you after. So North West Shelf extension, which presumably paves the way for Browse, is it? And
So thank you, Joe, and I love your passion. And I voted for you. It's the only time I didn't vote for the Labor Party when you campaigned for nuclear disarmament many years ago. So good to see you there. Look, there's still a role for gas. If there's a role for gas in Western Australia, as I explained earlier, we cannot walk away. Whether we like it or not, technology is not there yet that allows us to rely on renewables and other forms of technology. And it is the firming ability that you can dial it up and down, which coal and nuclear can't provide. So it's actually, it's an enabler of renewables currently. Gas is an enabler of renewables. By having gas in there, we can bring in the renewables. If we had nuclear there, there'd be no market for investment in renewables, no capacity to bring it in because nuclear has one speed flat out. By having gas in the system, you can dial it down when it's sunny and windy, or you have lots in the tank in storage. Now, if that's the case for Western Australia, it is also the case for other economies to be able to use gas to enable renewables. Okay. Now, I know that's not what you want to hear, but that is the reality for us in Western Australia. It's an enabler of renewables.
We're selling that gas to Japan and then they on sell.
Well, hang on. Okay, so the nuance here is it's Goldilocks, isn't it? We don't need too much. We just need the right amount. We don't need too little. We need a little. Yeah. So large-scale development is not necessarily required to keep the lights on. So Brad, would you like to sort of look at your nuance as to...
And that nuance is really important because unfortunately what government has proved is actually a lot more gas and out to 2070. And for me, that's the great mystery is why you as Minister didn't say 2070 is completely incompatible with our own target of 2050. How do you have an expanding gas industry way beyond when we're going to be net zero? And frankly, I don't even think Woodside expected to get 2070. I mean, this is actually the bizarrity of we could have literally given them 2050 and it would have been at least rational and they would have walked away happy. But Joe's right. And I think your answer is not a fair response to her question because it's actually, yeah, sure, we're going to need some gas, but as the evidence clearly shows, as renewables and storage ramp up, we're going to need less and less of it. But we're approving more and more of it. And what's going to Asia, as the evidence shows, and I'm, again, happy for you to talk about your evidence if you've got some, it's not displacing coal, it's displacing renewable energy. We're keeping them hooked on fossil fuels for longer. That's what Woodside's own report done by CSIRO shows. And I'm always fascinated why you and the Premier repeat another line, because I'm like, where are you getting this from? Where's your evidence that it's actually helping Asia transition?
All right, we've got time for one more question. The gentleman in the T-shirt there. So make sure you've got a very distinct question, and one question.
So, just to summarise, as I understand the situation from a scientific perspective, what's coming from the right side of this table, beginning with Reece, is climate change with 2.5 degrees of global warming. That's what you guys are basically saying. We need to be on a pathway to 1.5. With all due respect, Reece, we're not on that pathway. The consequences scientifically of being on the 2.5 degrees pathway are going to be ruinous. We're already seeing that with the Ningaloo Reef, which has been subjected to massive coral bleaching. So my question is, you guys need to really respect the science. And the science, by the way, is not saying that we can have net zero by 2050 and it'll be okay. We need zero by 2050 to stay on a 1.5 degrees pathway. And if we don't, then we'll lose our coral reefs and a substantial part of this state will become uninhabitable because of extreme temperature.
The issue is always about a balance. We currently require gas in Western Australia. I think other economies also require gas. It is needed to allow renewables. So, and in terms of the 70-year time frame, if we do our job right, we'll be getting out of gas a lot sooner than that. So there is an international demand, a global demand. Gas is being depleted. That's to say that if that's an extra supply to the market, it's not the case that there's all these other supplies as well. So you can still have global declining gas production and still have that facility operating. So,
For goodness sake.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got one time corner here, corner price. Last question. Thanks for your question.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the panel. It's been a great discussion. A question on the market side. I'd be interested to hear if there's any plans for the long duration market in WA to really ramp up that, especially your ambitions around vanadium and aboard the announcement. Thanks.
Yeah.
Vanadium is definitely, it's relatively new technology, but I think it's been around for about 10 or 15 years since it was invented in New South Wales. But what we're doing is we're looking at how it operates in Western Australia. So it has some great advantages. It's pretty robust technology, long duration. It's unlike a lithium battery. It doesn't need to be cooled all the time. It can be out in intense heat. So it makes sense for Western Australia. So the work that Horizon is doing up in Kununurra is about looking at how it can be used in those separate town grids, almost standalone systems and we can see that being rolled out all over Western Australia. And it's about building an industry around that as well. So there's naturally a market there, and a Horizon, if, the pilot works well in Kununurra, they'll be getting their energy from vanadium batteries. Also good application at mine sites, helping industry decarbonise, which we've talked about as well.
Mm. Steve, do you want to add to that?
Sorry, yeah, Connor. So I think your question is about long-term market. So the long-term market component. So there is an absolute issue with the marketplace in that we get fixated on the short-term market. So it's about how much energy required at 5-minute intervals all the way through. And there is a disjoint. Now, I actually think there's a real issue with the Australian energy market operator because it's designed to operate in the eastern states, which is this enormous mix, and it does not translate well into the West Australian marketplace, which is a much smaller It's 10% of the size. It's a smaller grid. And AEMO, I don't think, understands it. Now, one of the issues is also the interaction between AEMO and the Office of Energy, because nobody really knows what's going on. And we're not sure who's actually in charge. I've asked Reece a series of questions about this in Parliament last year. So we're sort of having this argument going, who's actually long-term planning? AEMO, to my mind, is the day-to-day stuff. It needs to get out of the way. The Office of Energy should be focused on that long-term planning. That hasn't been done. We talked about the whole of system plan coming out. That was supposed to happen 2 years ago. It was supposed to happen last year. It's still coming. And I understand it's a huge body of work. It's a massive undertaking to get it right. It might take a couple of years still yet to get it absolutely right and out there. But that disjoint between long-term planning through the state and short-term planning through AEMO is dramatically difficult, and it just doesn't work at this period of time.
Okay. We'll have to wrap up there. So thanks everyone for the questions. Thanks everyone from online. Well, thank the speakers to appear in person and to answer your questions. Thanks very much.